The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar, Efflorescence, what it is, what it isn't, prevention, removal, and protection. Before we get started, I have a few notes to go over. Everyone is in listen-only mode. That means you can hear us, but we cannot hear you. If you have a question at any time during this presentation, please type it in the question box, and we will answer all of your questions at the end of this webinar. Now I would like to introduce you to our presenter, Jake Boyer, head of Prosoco's Clean and Protect group of masonry cleaners and protective treatments. We will now begin today's webinar.
All right, thank you all for joining me today. I'm sure everybody was chomping at the bit to get through the week so they can get to Friday and spend their day learning about salts. I know I was. So since I can't see or hear you guys, I'll just have to assume that you're all sitting at your homes laughing hysterically at my jokes, taking diligent notes, sitting on the edge of your seats, all that. But without really knowing who's on the call and being able to see your faces, it's kind of hard for me to find balance between the different levels of understanding. So I've done my best to kind of provide some practical as well as a little bit of technical information and still get down to kind of the nuts and bolts of what you need to know. So before we dig into the presentation today, I always feel it's kind of important to understand who you're hearing it from and what they may know about the topic. So who is Prosoco and what do they do? You know, what do they know about this stuff anyways? Well, we're a fourth generation family owned and operated business. We started back in 1939. We pioneered some of the first chemical cleaners specifically for masonry. As well as the new construction side, as well as in the restoration world. We introduced a line of water repellents, later introduced silane siloxane technology, which is what's very commonly used in protective treatment today. That's technology that we brought to North America decades ago. Really, we were kind of founded and we still operate today under the mentality that good enough isn't. And we pride ourselves on that. So we're just celebrated our 80th year. We've come a long way in 80 years from masonry, from what started as automotive products to masonry cleaners and protective treatments. We branched out to finished concrete flooring products, eventually building envelope products, and most recently through acquisition, we got into the masonry anchor world with the acquisition of CTP or construction tie products to kind of tie it all together. Pun intended there. So over the last 80 years, we've also been able to build quite the team across the country. We've got, this is just one of our 4 examples of the representatives that we've got across the country. But we've got almost 100 people in the field just in the US and Canada alone. So basically the moral of this story is you're not alone, and you certainly don't have to be an expert in cleaners and protective treatments. You just need to know one. I'd be happy to connect you with your local representatives after the call if you're interested. So in a nutshell, that's kind of who Prosoco is. Let's get started on our topic today of efflorescence. So our learning objectives for today are we're going to talk about what efflorescence is and what it isn't. It's commonly misdiagnosed. So through that, we'll talk about a wide variety of other stains as well and the cleaners to use. And making sure that we understand that the appropriate cleaner for the appropriate stain and substrate is crucial to success. We'll talk about prevention, how we can stop efflorescence, or at least do our best to stop it or reduce it before construction even begins, during construction, and then if and when we do eventually get efflorescence, we'll talk about how to accurately diagnose it and make sure that we know exactly what we are dealing with, as well as what we're not dealing with. And then once we've diagnosed it, we'll talk about the different do's and don'ts of removal, best practices recognized by all industry organizations. And then we'll talk about how to make sure efflorescence, once it's gone, doesn't come back. Prevention and protection from reoccurrence. We'll cover a little bit of basic chemistry. Whoops, sorry, I scrolled through my slides there. There's a little spoiler alert. We'll talk a little bit about basic chemistry. We won't get too in depth on that. I'm happy to go deeper into that topic if you're interested at a later time. Efflorescence, by definition, in chemistry, is the migration of a salt to the surface of a porous material where it forms a coating. The essential process involves the dissolving of an internally held salt in water or occasionally in another solvent. So while a lot of efflorescence is mobilized and brought to the surface just from water, whether that's water during construction, rain, or otherwise, some of that efflorescence is not water soluble and is brought to the surface, reacts with the atmosphere, and forms different stains. Still technically under the umbrella of efflorescence by definition, however, commonly referred to as other names. So we'll get into that as well. And we'll talk about some of those other stains that it's very similar to and how to address those. But really the origin of the word efflorescence is from the French word meaning to flower. So this is how a lot of those other stains technically fall under this umbrella. It describes the bloom of the salt at the surface, or sometimes referred to as whiskers. What efflorescence most definitely isn't is effervescence, because that's not even a word. It's definitely not effervescence. That's something like Alka-Seltzer. And it's most certainly not evanescence, which is a 90s and early 2000s rock band. More often than not, the pronunciation of the word is butchered, and I get calls for these three stains: effervescence, evanescence, and effervescence, amongst any other variety of the pronunciations that are wrong. But the correct way to pronounce efflorescence is efflorescence. So if you take nothing else away from this today, at least you know how to say it correctly now. What efflorescence isn't, or at least isn't always, is a white powdery material. While this is the most common form of efflorescence, it's certainly not the only type. Here's another example of something that's technically classified as efflorescence, but certainly doesn't look like what we all know and despise as efflorescence. What efflorescence is it's a combination of three factors. You've got a soluble salt of some sort, you've got something to break that salt down, and you've got a migration path for that salt, once solubilized, to work its way out to the surface. So some of the common forms of efflorescence are sodium chloride, calcium hydroxide, vanadyl sulfate, manganese oxide, and many more. Some of these are natural, some of them man-made and additives for colors and other reasons. Something to break that down, water being the universal solvent. By definition, a solvent is anything that will solubilize something else. So water is referred to as the universal solvent. Oftentimes it's an acid, and we certainly hope it's not muriatic acid. I'll touch on that probably more than once throughout this presentation. By force of habit, if for no other reason. And sometimes it's some sort of other solvent, whether it's a different cleaner or something of that nature. And then as far as the migration path, the way that material gets out to the surface is that liquid with the solids dissolved into that liquid works its way out to the surface. Nature, always seeking an equilibrium, will move things from areas of high concentration to areas of low concentration. In the case of a masonry wall with a solubilized salt, you've got this moisture within the wall. Outboard of that wall, the air is drier, and so that moisture works its way out towards the exterior face of the wall. As the moisture evaporates, it deposits those solids that remain onto the surface of the wall in the form of efflorescence. So as you can see here, there's a lot of different salts that are found in masonry, whether it's in the wall itself, whether it's some sort of chemical combination as a result of a cleaning process or otherwise, or even maybe it's from just the surrounding elements. Efflorescence is not always from the masonry itself, though. It comes from places like de-icing salts, maybe salt air or salt water. In a lot of cases, moisture or efflorescence can even come from the ground that we build upon. Through a condition called rising damp, which is where capillary action absorbs the moisture and the soluble salts in the ground and draws it up into the masonry from the ground itself. So efflorescence is found in most masonry types as a result of that. There's a lot of different sources, whether it's direct from the substrate itself or surrounding elements or whatever it may be. It is found in most masonry types. What efflorescence is, technically speaking, it's a word that can be used to define several different common masonry stains. Efflorescence is also frequently caused by human error in some form or fashion, whether that's using the wrong cleaner or eliminating a step or a material through the construction process that results in more water in the wall, whatever it may be. It's frequently caused, or at least expanded upon from some sort of human error. Another thing that it typically is, especially in issues of reoccurrence, is it's often a symptom of bigger issues. Efflorescence may just be the thing that's visible, but there could be something else much more significant going on kind of behind the visible surface. Efflorescence is most commonly known as that white crystalline deposit of water-soluble salts on the surface of masonry, and that's kind of how we'll refer to it for the majority of this presentation, but do know that that word can be interpreted in different ways. And the common efflorescence that we're all familiar with is relatively easily treated given the right tools and products, and certainly once it's been accurately diagnosed. However, it is commonly misdiagnosed. I get a lot of calls anytime somebody sees anything white on the wall at all. They refer to it as efflorescence or effervescence or evanescence or whatever it may be. So we'll talk a little bit about how to diagnose that. The one thing that's for sure, and that we can all agree on, I'm sure wherever you're at, wherever your experience level is efflorescence is a real, you get the rest. I'll give you a second to contain your laughter there as we move on. All right, so now that we all know what efflorescence is and what it isn't, what can we do about it? How can we help prevent this? Well, like many things in life, if you plan and act accordingly, prevention is more significant and better, and the best first step to a cure. It's greater than the cure itself. So how do we prevent efflorescence? Well, prevention begins long before the building ever breaks ground and long before you ever start constructing that wall, but it actually begins in the design phase. So the first thing that we can do is we can design our buildings, and depending on what your expertise is, if you're the contractor or the mason or whatever, you may not have this luxury, but we can certainly promote it as an industry-wide thing to design our buildings to incorporate water management features. And they don't have to be ugly gutters and scuppers and things like that, but we can use these things for not only functionality, but for beauty as well, right? So here's a good example of a beautiful masonry building that's got a lot of excellently detailed water management features. Now, we know there's not a lot of buildings that are built like this today, so what can we do in our more modern common masonry buildings that we see today? Well, we can start by specifying at the very least, specify a water shedding joint profile. Every time I step onto a project and I see a rake joint on an exterior wall, I just kind of cringe a little because I know it's much more likely to have issues than had they gone with a different joint profile. And once that wall is built and ready for its final clean down, still from the specification perspective, we can specify a proprietary cleaner that's made specifically for the substrates on each project. Not a product that worked on the last project because that was a different type of masonry, but a product that works specific for the substrates on this project. Each substrate has a unique chemistry and requires a slightly different approach to effectively clean it without causing damage. That's our first step in any masonry cleaning operation, is to first do no harm. It's kind of our Hippocratic oath that we borrow from other industries. While there are some cleaners out there that may claim to clean all masonry, we'll talk a little bit later on about just because you can doesn't mean you should. And all industries for that matter, masonry and otherwise, any industry where you're cleaning anything recognizes the importance of the appropriate cleaner for the substrate and the stain that you're trying to remove. One of the best and easiest ways that we can prevent efflorescence and many of these other common stains is to first never, ever, ever allow raw muriatic acid on your project to clean your masonry. For a long time, it was the only choice, but today it's recognized as one of the leading causes of a lot of different forms of damage in masonry. It's not because it doesn't work, and you can certainly make it work. You just need to be much more careful with it. There are a lot better alternatives to muriatic acid today. This is kind of where the one-size-fits-all approach was born, because for a long time that was the only thing available. But all masonry substrates are unique in their chemical composition, and none of them like muriatic acid. Specifying a one-size-fits-all cleaner for all of your different masonry buildings and types is the next worst thing that you can do as far as causing damage and harm. It's pretty much unanimous across the industry that one size does not fit all. And you don't have to take that from me. You can take it from all the authorities within our industry on the topic, which rarely happens, but they do all agree on a few topics. And that is that one size does not fit all for masonry cleaning. We should always seek to use the gentlest yet effective method, and products and techniques that are applicable to one masonry wall may not be applicable to others. So these are three of the top industry organizations. I think we can all agree, and they all clearly state this fact. I mean, it sure would be nice if one cleaner did do it all, because then our grocery store aisles and our cabinets under our kitchen sinks wouldn't look like this, right? I mean, it would be great if we could eliminate all that extra stuff and just simplify things with soap for everything, right? Well, unfortunately, that's not how it works. I mean, even when it comes to something as simple as hair, it's all hair, but there are different chemical compositions of cleaners for different colors. That's a testament to the unique nature of all different substrates. So if you're going to have 200 different options for something as simple as hair, and you're going to have 10 different cleaners under your kitchen sink for your countertops and your floors and your stainless steel appliances and all that, why would you relegate the multi-million-dollar masonry facade to the one-size-fits-all approach? I mean, after all, a cleaner that's strong enough to clean say a standard gray split-face block wall is likely far too aggressive for a honed or polished natural stone facade. The analogy I always like to use with this is the hammer. There's a lot of different types of hammers, right? If I'm going to work and I don't know what I'm going to be doing for the day, I just know that I need to bring a hammer of some sort, I'm probably going to grab the sledgehammer. I mean, after all, I can do pretty much anything with a sledgehammer, right? I certainly don't want to arrive onto the job site to find that I'll be breaking concrete had I packed my finishing tack hammer for the day, right? So what happens when I show up to the job with my sledgehammer and find out that I'm going to be building fine furniture and tapping in finish nails all day? Well, I certainly can use that sledgehammer and very gently, very carefully tap those finish nails in, but I haven't given myself a good chance for doing that effectively without causing any damage. And just because I can most certainly does not mean that I should. There's a lot of things in life that you can do that you probably shouldn't. Take this guy with his pontoon boat and smart car, for example. I don't even want to know what's going to happen when that little plastic wheel hits 60 on the highway. So just because we can certainly doesn't mean we should. So the next thing that we can do in the specification phase is we can specify a protective treatment. And we want to make sure that we specify the right protective treatment. We want to make sure that we specify one that maintains the substrate's natural breathability, one that doesn't create a film over the surface, and one that chemically bonds and reacts with the substrate that it's applied to. The most common chemistry that checks all these boxes are the silanes, siloxanes, and silicones of the world. So now we're past the specification phase. The job is a go. We're ready to get started. What else can we do before we start constructing that wall to actually help prevent efflorescence as it goes up? Well, there are a couple more steps that we can take. One of them may seem like common sense, but it's to store masonry off the ground and to cover it from the elements. I can't tell you how many times I step onto a job site and see the masonry stored something like this. I mean, it's a very common thing. Some guys take the approach of, I'll just deal with it later, but that is one of the easy steps that you can take early on to help prevent efflorescence. Next thing we can do is, as we construct that wall, we can construct it with the understanding that water will get into that wall somehow, some way, whether it's during construction, during the post-construction clean down, or through voids and cracks and deficiencies in construction later on. So we can make sure that that water has a route to get out if and when it does get in through things like motor collection devices, proper through wall flashings, weep holes, etc. Water will get into that wall, so ask yourself, have you provided it a way for it to get out? So the next thing we can do is, as we build that wall, we can make sure and just follow best industry practices. Don't break out the 4-inch hole saw for the 2-inch hole, right? Make sure you're properly tooling all your joints. Make sure you caulk or fill any other voids. Make sure you're filling up your mortar joints completely. It's best practices. This is stuff that I'd like to believe that most people on this call know, but sometimes we just need reminders of those common things that are so common sense we forget about them from time to time. And as we continue to build that wall, we can certainly cap that wall at the end of the day, even if it's something as simple as throwing a plank or looks like in this case a couple of pieces of leftover insulation over the top of that wall, just to prevent moisture from getting into that wall. Any unnecessary moisture is only a source for issues. So let's say you did everything right. You detailed it right, you designed it right, you built it right, you protected it throughout the process, you finished the job, and it still looks like this, right? You've got efflorescence. Well, relax, it's not all your fault. And if efflorescence like this, the common loose white powdery form of efflorescence is all you're dealing with, you're in pretty good shape because that's relatively easy to clean. Let's talk about the different methods and kind of the do's and don'ts of removing that efflorescence if and when you do get it. Well, the first step to any cure is an accurate diagnosis, right? If you think you're dealing with efflorescence, but you actually find that you're dealing with something else, yet you had approached it with a method that would have been effective for efflorescence, you may be sorely disappointed. So what's the easiest way to diagnose the common efflorescence? Like what you see here. Well, the first test you can do is you just touch it. You see if it readily breaks free from the surface. If it's loosely bound on the surface like that, it's very likely efflorescence that you're dealing with. Sometimes it comes on thicker than other times. You can see here, this is actually the sign at the entry to my old neighborhood. If it was still my neighborhood now, I probably would have gone out and cleaned it. But just with a quick touch, some guys will actually lick their finger, touch the wall and lick their finger again and see if it tastes salty. I don't really recommend that, but usually just by brushing your hand across the surface, seeing if it comes off on your hand or if it readily breaks apart is a quick way to diagnose it. If you don't have access to touch it or you don't want to touch it, I know we're all kind of a little gun shy to touch many things these days. But if you just got a bottle of water, splash a little bit of water on it. Common efflorescence disappears when it's wet. Now, much of this will reappear as it dries because I haven't thoroughly rinsed it and actually removed it completely from the wall. But that's a quick and easy way to tell if that is in fact what you're dealing with. Remember though, not every white stain that looks like efflorescence on the wall is in fact efflorescence. So take a look at this one, for example. This is one that would be commonly misdiagnosed as efflorescence. So let's run it through the test that we talked about as far as diagnosing. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to just brush our hand across the wall and see if anything comes off on our hand. Well, nothing came off on my hand there, so now I'm starting to believe that this may not in fact be efflorescence. So I'm going to run it through my next test, which is splashing a little bit of water on the wall and seeing if it disappears. So as I splash water on the wall, I noticed that white stain has not in fact disappeared at all. In fact, it doesn't seem to have been affected at all. So what's going on? Well, I don't, in this case, have efflorescence. And through those two quick, easy tests, I was able to realize that. What do I have then? Well, I've got what's called calcium carbonate, aka lime run. So lime run is probably the one stain that I get more calls about, that they say, hey, I've got efflorescence, need to know how to clean it. If I were to just answer that question and say, okay, use product XYZ for that, they would probably go and try that approach and be sorely disappointed when that product didn't even begin to touch what this stain may actually be. So what is lime run? Well, it gets to the surface, and it could technically be classified as a form of efflorescence in the way that it's deposited at the surface and it blooms or flowers, if you will. But really what it is, it's free lime within the masonry itself or within the mortar joints that has deposited on the surface. And over time, it reacts with the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and goes through the process of carbonating and creates what we call calcium carbonate. So lime run does not disappear when it's wet. Well, what caused it? Well, it's the same thing that causes efflorescence, and that's moisture gets into the wall, it solubilizes that free lime or the calcium hydroxide, it brings it out to the face of the wall, and then as that water evaporates, it deposits it there. The difference with lime run versus common efflorescence is that the atmosphere has now rendered it insoluble in water. So you're going to need something that's a little bit more aggressive to get this stain to go away. As far as removal, first step you can do is always you want to mechanically remove as much as possible. That would be classified as the least aggressive means, and then use the proper proprietary masonry cleaner specifically designed to address that condition. How do I prevent it? Well, you just keep as much water out of the wall as possible. The same means of prevention as far as preventing efflorescence. What about this one? This is another one that I get commonly misdiagnosed as efflorescence. Well, in this case, we've got hard water deposits. So what is it? Well, it's a mineral deposit, typically from irrigation or other sources that aren't intended to be on the wall. But those minerals deposit on the wall as the water evaporates. They go through that same process and they're rendered insoluble in water. It's a result of just water, the masonry being exposed to that water with a high mineral content. Like I said, oftentimes it's because of misguided irrigation. Removal is done best with a product specifically designed for removing hard water deposits. And as far as prevention goes, just point your sprinklers at your lawn, not at your walls. Yeah, when you're building masonry and concrete and all that, water helps it get strong and everything else. However, once the wall is up, you do not need to continue to water that wall. So you can just go ahead and use that water on your grass and your shrubs as opposed to your brick and block. So what about the next one here? Well, the next one here is, again, very commonly misdiagnosed as efflorescence. In this case, we've got a condition called white scum. Now, what that white scum is that is residual mortar that during the new construction cleaning was partially dissolved by whatever that cleaning compound was. And basically what you did here is you didn't pre-wet the wall enough and or you didn't rinse the wall thoroughly enough after the cleaning. And when I say you didn't pre-wet the wall enough, the way that factors in is by pre-wetting the wall, you're preventing anything that later runs down over the face of that wall from reabsorbing in. You're filling that core structure of the masonry to make sure that anything that is broken down in the cleaning process and running down over the face of that wall on its way to the ground, hopefully, doesn't have a chance to hit a dry section in the wall and absorb back into the wall and redeposit that staining or soiling on the face of the wall. And then certainly as you're rinsing and doing your final rinse down, making sure that you wash all of that material that at that point in time is still likely soft and solubilized. Rinse that material all the way off the wall. As much as we are all about saving water and saving the planet and all that, and I'm a big believer in sustainable construction practices and all things that surround that, masonry cleaning is not typically the place that you want to try and save water. What it winds up doing is actually spending more water by trying to save a few gallons on the first side of the project, creating an issue like white scum, and then having to use twice as much water to eventually get that off. One of the best ways you can prevent a condition like this is to use that water, thoroughly pre-wet the wall, thoroughly rinse the wall, and that's a whole nother topic of discussion, but the method that's the reason we recommend cleaning from the bottom up, is to make sure that everything below the point of contact of the area that you're working is thoroughly saturated, to make sure that this does not happen. So this is another one that pretty much everybody that looks at this picture, the first thing that goes through their mind is efflorescence. Well, if you look a little closer up, what's actually going on here is a condition called sealer blush. What it is you've applied a film forming sealer over a substrate that had too high of a moisture content. Now, whether that was from a weather event like rain, or if it was you applied the protective treatment too soon after the initial clean down, whatever that may be, you've got moisture behind that film forming sealer. Now, this can also take place if you apply a breathable penetrating product just far too heavy. If I put it on at 25% of the suggested coverage rate, I can have this condition as well. But sealer blush is another one that's commonly misdiagnosed for efflorescence. You can see why in the way that it looks. The best thing you can do as far as removal is remove it with some sort of stripper or a product that's specifically designed to digest the component that sealer is made of. And to prevent it in the future, use a non-film forming, penetrating, breathable protective treatment. We'll talk a little bit more about that here in a minute. Now this one, while it does technically fall under the classification of efflorescence, this one is actually more commonly diagnosed as something else in the form of a biological stain. They see the green coloring and think, oh, I've got some sort of moss or algae or lichen or something growing on my wall. What it really is it's vanadium. What causes vanadium is those free vanadium salts that are oftentimes used within some of the manufactured masonry products, sometimes for color and other effects. But if they're dissolved in water, or oftentimes the most frequent culprit of this particular stain is muriatic acid. It gets in, it breaks down those salts and brings them out to the surface and deposits them there. Again, once they've been deposited, they're not water soluble any longer, so you're going to need to use a specialty cleaner specifically designed for removing those type of salts. And as far as prevention for the next time, make sure you're using the cleaner that's specifically designed for the substrate you're working on. If you've got a substrate that is known to be high in vanadium content, you're going to want to use a product that is designed to control that vanadium. Another form of efflorescence by definition is called brown manganese. This gets out to the surface in the same way all the other forms of efflorescence do, water, or again, this is another condition that's commonly caused by the use of muriatic acid. It breaks down that manganese oxide within the substrate and brings it out to the surface, deposits it there, where it is later rendered insoluble in water. Again, a proprietary cleaner specifically designed for that, both specifically designed to remove it, and as far as prevention goes, using one that's specifically designed to prevent it. So efflorescence, now we know what it is and what it isn't. We know some of the common steps and the easiest things that we can do to prevent it, or at least reduce the likelihood of it happening. We know how to diagnose it when it does happen. And we know how to fix efflorescence, as well as a lot of the other things that we thought were efflorescence. So it's finally time to address removal of actual common efflorescence, right? So one thing, again, that all industry organizations agree is that you always want to start with the least aggressive means necessary that you can get an effective result. So as far as the different methods for removal, the least aggressive, starting there, would typically be the mechanical removal method. You saw in some of those quick videos how loosely bound that material is to the surface. Oftentimes, just a stiff brush will brush common efflorescence right off of the surface. You never want to use a metallic scraper on masonry, certainly not in combination with any form of acidic product. We all know metals and acids don't typically play well together. And in addition to, or in place of, a mechanical removal, a water rinse oftentimes can get the majority of that efflorescence off. Now, some of that may come back as it dries if you haven't fully dissolved it and removed it from the wall. So that removal is often temporary. But one thing you certainly don't want to do is use high pressure, as you can drive that water deeper into the surface, making it harder for it to dry out, and in turn mobilizing salts that were at one point deep enough into that surface that they never would have naturally been brought out. If you do need to step it up to the next method, chemical removal, make sure you're using a proprietary cleaner that's specifically designed for the substrate that you're working on and the stain that you're trying to remove. And always start with a mild dilution and work your way up as necessary. If you start with a mild dilution and it's ineffective, the result is you still have the same condition you had. If you start with a very aggressive dilution or a very aggressive product, and it has adverse effects, those are a lot of times much harder to reverse, or in some cases even irreparable. So start mild, work your way up. You can always get more aggressive. It's very hard to get less aggressive after you've started with something strong. So here it is. There's your common efflorescence. What is it? Well, it's a loose, powdery surface salt that's deposited onto the face of the masonry and disappears when wet. This is actually that sign at my old neighborhood that you saw the videos of a minute ago, where I splashed a little bit of water on it and it disappeared. I haven't driven back past it today, but I've got to believe that it's probably right back where it started or close to. So what caused it? Well, again, it's the natural salts present in the masonry, oftentimes the ground itself, or even sometimes the air or the water that surrounds it. In salt conditions, salt water can cause efflorescence. You'll see that a lot of times on bulkhead walls around marine areas. How do I remove it? Well, you're going to want to use, again, starting with a very mild product, typically a hydrochloric acid-based cleaner. If you've already got it on site and you're doing your new construction cleaning, a mild dilution of that can be very effective. If you're there just to address the presence of efflorescence, you're going to start even a step back from that with some sort of other acidic blend. Ideally, phosphoric and gluconic acids have been proven very effective on efflorescence. My personal go-to product is one of ours called light duty concrete cleaner. That's a very effective cleaner for common efflorescence. And then as far as prevention, we talked about it already. Complete prevention is very tough, but you can do a lot of very easy things to reduce the chances and certainly reduce the significance of the efflorescence if and when it does bloom. And then as far as preventing reoccurrence, you want to make sure and use the right protective treatment to keep the water out of that wall once it's done. And like I said, once it's gone, you want to keep it gone by using the appropriate protective treatment. Now, much like cleaners, there are different protective treatments that are designed specifically for certain substrates. Different types of stone contain different elements. Some contain silica, some are comprised of calcium carbonate. Those two react differently in the presence of things like silanes and siloxanes. I've got other presentations I can really get into the specifics of that if you're interested. But for now, just know that you're going to want to use the appropriate protective treatment for the substrate you're working on. And you want to make sure that it's breathable. You want to make sure that you allow that water, as it turns from liquid water into vapor, to work its way out. Now, this is a quick illustration. On the other end of this arm and the little red hose you see there is our lab manager. As he blows into this little device, there's a piece of masonry in there that has been protected with a breathable silane siloxane water repellent. And as you blow into this device, you can see that the air readily works its way through. However, obviously, it's holding the liquid water out. So the most common type for that is going to be a silane siloxane and some silicones. But they work by lining the larger areas of the pore structure of that masonry, which allows it to keep the liquid water out, keep that liquid, the large bulk water, from penetrating, yet while still allowing the smaller water vapor molecules, as they're broken down, to work their way out of that substrate. So when masonry is cleaned and protected, it's one of the most durable and one of the most beautiful and sustainable building materials that we've got available to us today. So with a couple of easy steps to take during the pre-construction phases as far as prevention, during construction to prevent efflorescence and other stains by keeping water out of the wall, and thereafter by cleaning it with the appropriate cleaners and protecting it with the right protective treatments. We can make sure that masonry remains a viable choice for years and years to come. So what did we learn today? Well, we learned what efflorescence is. It's a French word meaning to flower, which by definition can include a lot of other types of stains. We learned that in general, though, it's a salt of some form that's been deposited at the surface of the wall. We learned that it certainly isn't effervescence or evanescence or any other pronunciation. And it's certainly not every white stain that's on the side of a building. It is responsible for a lot of them, but many of those other stains need to be addressed in a different fashion than common efflorescence. We learned that prevention is nearly impossible because of the number of different sources of that water and of those salts. However, there are a few steps you can take to certainly minimize it and make the removal much easier than those other conditions that may be much harder to remove. We learned how to diagnose efflorescence. Just a quick splash of water or a brush of the hand or even a stiff bristled masonry brush can quickly differentiate common efflorescence from other similar looking stains. We learned how to remove it, as well as a lot of those other stains by starting with the least aggressive means necessary and working your way up. We learned the importance of a specific cleaner for the specific substrates, and that one cleaner does not do it all, or at least shouldn't do it all. And we learned about protection and how to make sure that we reduce the amount of water that gets into that wall before, during, and after construction being done with the proper protective treatment. And again, I certainly hope that you learn that you don't need to be an expert in cleaners and protective treatments. You just have to know one, and everybody's got, I'll put my number up here again in a minute. You've got our 800 number that will always be answered by a live person, and you've got a wide support network across the country for on-site support. When cleaned and protected properly, masonry will continue to thrive as one of the most beautiful materials available on the market. And I hope that you got something from this today. So I think that's about all that I can possibly talk about salt without some additional prompting questions. So I'll open it up now if anybody has any questions.
All right, great. Thanks, Jake. So if you have a question, you can type it in the question box now. And while we're giving you just a minute to type those, I'd like to tell you about the next MCAA webinar. This afternoon, we will present a contractor roundtable discussion of the coronavirus and the job site. That will begin at 3 p.m. today. So go to masoncontractors.org/live to register. First question for you, Jake. Any specifics for CMU in hot climates? With restrictions on open air sandblasting, pressure washing CMU is the standard cleaning method.
Right, so pressure washing is it's a very common method. It's not to say that it doesn't work. Efflorescence can very easily be removed with just water in a lot of cases. As you saw, the thing that you need to be careful with as far as pressure washing is making sure you're not driving water deeper into that substrate. Typically, one of the rules of thumb for masonry is lower pressure is better. Certainly when you're applying an acidic or some form of chemical cleaner, you never want to apply that at a high pressure, as that high pressure will drive that material deep into the wall. Where when you're cleaning a masonry wall, you want to keep that cleaning power concentrated right at the surface, right where it's visible. Whether you're in a hot climate or a cold climate, anywhere you're at, and obviously different precautions need to be taken to make sure that that wall does not dry out during the cleaning process. Using ample water, but keeping that at a low pressure, and do your best to not resort to abrasive methods like sandblasting. It can be very effective and it can be done correctly in a lot of cases, but it's pretty easy to screw it up too and cause some irreparable damage. So I hope that answered the question, but I guess the takeaway from that is you're better off to use the appropriate tool for the job and not have to resort to more aggressive methods, and certainly don't blast stuff into the wall with high pressure.
Jake, your next question. If we have lime run on CMU, can we use heavy duty concrete cleaner?
Yes, with an asterisk, I'll say. Heavy duty concrete cleaner it's a relatively aggressive, one of our proprietary cleaners. Hydrochloric acid base, it does have some additional buffering and chelating agents to help protect some of those more sensitive elements within the masonry. If I've got concrete blocks, say I've got a split face concrete block, heavy texture, then yeah, heavy duty concrete cleaner all day long. If I've got a burnished block, however, a very smooth face with a honed or a polished finish on the face, I'm not going to want to use heavy duty concrete cleaner because that's going to be too aggressive and could result in an etch or removing some of that face of the block. In a case like a burnished block, I'm going to use light duty concrete cleaner, which does not contain any hydrochloric acid. That's the phosphoric and gluconic acid blend. So to answer the question, can you use heavy duty concrete cleaner on concrete block? Like many answers, it depends. Yes, if I've got a textured surface. No, if I've got a burnished or a smooth face surface like that. If you've got a specific project in mind, feel free to shoot me. I'll put my contact information up here again. Feel free to shoot me questions, pictures, anytime I can get photos of what you're dealing with. I can help more accurately diagnose and recommend it.
All right, here's your next question. Any major differences in treating historic masonry buildings, and in parentheses, massive walls, versus cavity wall construction?
Absolutely, good question. Historically, masonry walls, mass masonry wall construction, the wall was so large and it was so thick that a lot of times the natural wetting and drying cycles of that wall would remediate its own problems. Water from natural sources like rain is only going to penetrate so deep before that equilibrium flips from the rainy outside to the dry wall to vice versa. You've got a wet, saturated wall and a dry outside. So that moisture moves in both directions. And oftentimes those mass masonry walls, a lot of those problems will correct themselves. And you can use different means and chemicals and different products on historic masonry buildings that you may not want to use in today's more modern cavity wall construction. When you're dealing with a mass masonry wall, and certainly if you're dealing with any historic projects, we've got preservationists and historic masonry specialists on our staff that can help diagnose and tell you which products are either allowed by the local regulating organizations or intended and designed specifically for those substrates. We've got over 3,000 specific products and formulations that we've developed for one-off projects or substrates. But with regard to the mass masonry wall versus the cavity wall, the short answer is yeah, you typically address them in slightly different fashions.
Next
and again, I can get more specific if you've got an example to share.
Your next question. Do you find the use of IWR in both mortar and CMU will assist in prevention?
Yeah, absolutely. IWR, integral water repellents, the use of those in manufactured elements like concrete block or cast stone, certainly in the mortar. If you're going to use it in the masonry substrate itself, you definitely need to use it in the mortar as well. We don't manufacture or produce any of those integral water repellents, so I am not an expert on the topic, but I do know enough about them to know that they certainly do and are intended to help prevent efflorescence as well as other stains. They are best used as part of a belt and suspenders approach. In other words, even if you've got an integral water repellent, most of the producers of those products, as well as the masonry substrates that they're used in, will still recommend a post-construction field applied, breathable, penetrating water repellent. That's not a mouthful. So they're best used as part of the belt and suspenders approach, but yes, they certainly do have a positive impact on helping reduce these things.
And his second question is, do you find the use of different mortars can help prevent or cause more water intrusion into the wall, masonry cement, mortar cement, or the SPL, NPL?
They certainly can. Different strengths of mortars have different absorption rates. And even within the same type of mortar, different methods of tooling can result in different performance as far as water infiltration. If I've got a nice smooth paste finish on each of those mortar joints, I'm going to reduce the amount of water that penetrates in. Now, if I've got that nice smooth finish and then I come along with a cleaner that's too aggressive for that particular substrate, or maybe too strong of a concentration of that cleaner for that substrate, and I dissolve or etch away the face of that mortar joint, and I remove some of that paste, now I've made that mortar joint much more susceptible to additional water absorption. So yes, different types of mortar can certainly have an impact on the amount of water that's absorbed. And even beyond that, within the same type of mortar, there's a lot of different things that can be done throughout the course of that project that can result in one project done with that mortar has little to no water infiltration, and the next one, if I didn't take the appropriate steps, can have a lot of water infiltration. So it's another one of those it depends kind of answers. Again, specific projects and photos, I can always help get a little more concise with my answers.
If no light-duty concrete cleaner is available, can 600 detergent be used to remove efflorescence off a standard CMU? And if so, what dilution do you recommend?
Absolutely. Yes, it can. As I mentioned, typically if you're there just to deal with efflorescence, you're going to want to start with something maybe a little bit milder than 600. Or if you've got 600 on the truck, yeah, a very mild dilution of that can be very effective against efflorescence without causing any damage to the substrate. If I'm going to use 600, I'm going to start at a very mild dilution, something like 1 to 8, 1 to 10, 1 to 12 even. It depends really on the conditions that I've got, how strong that efflorescence is, how bad it is in that case. But yes, it can certainly be used to remove common efflorescence.
Sorry about that. So in addition, we have found the use of brick cement, masonry cement tends to allow more efflorescence versus an NPL. My research has concluded that brick cement has more filters and air content, possibly causing more water intrusion. Do you have anything to add to this or against it?
I'd have to, a lot of times when I get asked a question, and this probably drives some people nuts, but I answer a question with a lot more questions, and this would be one of those scenarios. I'd like to learn a lot more about specifically what you're talking about and make sure that I'm in a position to answer that correctly. So whoever asked that question, I encourage you to reach out to me afterwards, and we can have a more in-depth conversation about that.
All right. He said he was going to email you.
Okay, very good.
All right. Well, I think that might be all the questions. So, Jake, thank you very much for doing this webinar for us. Everybody, this webinar will be available either later this afternoon or Monday. It will be in the on-demand section of the MCAA website. And Jake, thank you very much for an awesome presentation today. Be safe, everybody, and have a wonderful Friday and weekend.
Thank you all. Take care. Stay safe out there.